Okay, we're going to move into now how do you build capacity and power in our organizations to exercise power vis-a-vis the no's that we experience towards the second yes. And I want to start by just telling a story. At our table, when we were talking about how our congregations were organized, we got a lot of, well, we're organized as individuals and we do projects, but there wasn't much that we did collectively. So I want to tell a story. It's similar to Michael's story. It comes out of the Portland Organizing Project, which was a predecessor to Metropolitan Alliance for Common Good. It had to do with housing. As we were listening in our neighborhood, believe it or not, this neighborhood didn't used to look like this. One time there were 1,000 vacant and abandoned houses in this neighborhood, in zip code 97211. There were drug houses, there was vagrancy, there were problems with people getting access to housing. How did we find that out? By listening to the people, by going to them one-to-one and organizing house meetings and asking them about the pressures on their families. And sure enough, you know, a black member from St. Andrew said, well, I want to buy a house in the neighborhood, and I have money, but the bank won't loan to me. That had to do with civil rights in Portland. Was there redlining? You know what that is? Was there redlining in Portland? Oh, yes, there was. So we discovered that. Other people, you know, were afraid to be in the neighborhood because of safety and gangs and drugs. So there was just lots of problems. And we heard about that by organizing, listening. I love the word that you gave us, Joe, about, you know, Quaker listening. And this was listening to others, you know, one-to-one and taking it seriously and then moving into action. So long story short, we organized a housing work group and we discovered that there was already organizing going on the other side of the river to build the Pearl and South Waterfront and to use all the public money that had been designated for housing in the city of Portland in those two neighborhoods. So our organizer organized us in groups of 50 or so to go to the Central City Task Force, which was a who's who of the city of Portland, the CEOs of the major corporations, the utilities and the banks, the superintendent of schools, the president of Portland State University, a who's who, the Central City Task Force, who had plans for using all the public money in the city of Portland. And we sat in groups of 50 and we listened and we watched this political process. And then on cue, we walked out into the lobby and the organizer asked us, what did you see? What did you observe? What's happening? Who's exercising power? Whose values are being reflected? And those queries or questions helped us discover that we didn't exactly like that plan. So long story short, we ended up in negotiation and having one-to-ones with all the CEOs and the executives around the table. At first, I just swallowed my chewing tobacco. I don't chew, but I just swallowed my tongue thinking, well, we can't call up a CEO and ask for a one-to-one meeting. But that's what we did, and we did it in teams. And I was responsible to call Fred Buckman, who was the CEO of Portland, of PP&L, and a big company, $453 million, 16-story, you know, building and office and walnut table. But he received us because we had been in the room where public business was being conducted, and he received us because he had an accountability to the city of Portland as well as to his company because he was acting for public business. And eventually we negotiated. We won't try to stop the $150 million that goes to the water, it was called River District for the Pearl and South Waterfront. But we want to pledge from you that you will help raise $150 million for a public fund for affordable housing throughout the city of Portland. And they shook hands on that at a big assembly with about 900 people there in what's now the river, what's now Pearl. It was vacant then. And then they made good on the first 2 years, and we were able to do about 2,000 more units of affordable housing with the funding that came. And then All the corporations were bought out by others. PP&L was bought out by Scottish Power, PG&E. Who bought them? Enron. First National Bank became Wells Fargo. U.S. Bank became First Bank in Minneapolis. So we no longer had local people that we could deal with, and the deal was lost. But the exercise of power to get from, the original yes, which was, partly about human dignity and affordable housing for all, and then the no, which was sometimes racial, sometimes just greed to make more money. It took power and capacity to get to the other side to the second yes, which was not meager, but was a step in the right direction. So we're going to demonstrate today the foundation, or tonight, the foundational practice of relational organizing in the intentional relational conversation. You all read the paper? Dick Harmon wrote. He was the organizer who took us out in the lobby and asked the questions about what was going on in public business. You were all also assigned to make an appointment and to have a one-to-one conversation. Did some of you do that?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, how'd that go? Let's hear back from a couple people about how it went to have a one-to-one with somebody. Who said yes? Heather, was that you?
I did.
Good for you. Well, you know all about this, right?
Sure.
Sure. So, how'd that go?
Not so well.
Not so well. Why?
Well, I wanted to share something I'm passionate about, and he wanted to share something equally that he was passionate about, and they were just, there was not much meeting.
Okay.
So, maybe I shouldn't have said yes so eagerly.
No? Yeah, over here, huh? Cecil's pointing at you, but...
Oh, at me?
Yeah, I guess.
I tried more than one. I mean, I tried before I got
Can you stand up, please? Speak loudly, yeah,
okay.
way across the room.
Generally.
Jan, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, my name is Jan. I was going to say James. My conversations, I think, generally, I wanted to get a global thing out of this. Not meaning global, really, in conversation. Most people are really interested, and there's nothing wrong with this, they're really interested in their particular small piece, and what's really concrete, and what they personally, by themselves perhaps, looking at the pioneer system, can accomplish. And when you stretch it bigger than that, I mean, they have more credibility than I do, trying to talk kind of side ideas here. When you try to stretch it bigger than that, then it kind of dies down. So then I shovel in a lot more questions about what they're doing. So I learned something. I come away with the feeling that I haven't been an effective communicator to them. I got something out of this, but I don't know if I quite accomplished what.
So you read the article by Dick Harmon, who's a very practiced person, organizer, and listener, and it takes practice. It takes lots of practice. And even though it seems like having an intentional conversation with someone should be pretty straightforward and sort of the course, we really lost that art with all of the technology and the lighting and everything, the separation of people in neighborhoods, that we've really lost the art of conversing and getting to know people in our communities. So the practice of one-to-one intentional relational conversations it's a recovery practice in some ways to recover the value of those one-to-one relationships. It's about relationships. It's not about whether you're on the same page issue-wise. It's about establishing a relationship that's deeper beyond really those kind of cover conversations that we have with one another often. So Cecil, do you want to say something?
I would say, in our church, we're still working on the reconciling congregation. There's quite a conflict going on. So I decided I needed to understand a little bit better what the other point of view was. So I asked for an appointment with one of the gentlemen who I am doing, but not well. And essentially the conversation first went about ourselves, our families, our backgrounds. And when I found out he had children and grandchildren, I asked him the question, well, do you have any concerns about what the future's going to be like for your grandchildren? And that question got so rich that we found we shared very strongly a common view and concern about the future. And in follow-up meetings, I'm sure we'll develop that further.
That's great.
Okay, so we're going to, Solveig and Toby have agreed to do a model relational intentional conversation in front of you all. We ask that you just pay attention. If you can't hear and want to move up closer, do, but don't interrupt. We're just going to let them go on for 15 minutes or so, and then we're going to make observations based on Biocommons kind of chart, and I put it up here so you could remember it, about intentional conversations, what it's not and what it is. So afterwards we'll debrief and try to learn from the conversation. Any questions? Okay, Toby and Solveig.
People move around, and some of you are going to be looking at the back of folks. If you want to move your chair, if you want to
Move them now if you want to move them.
So please, yeah.
Or you can stand if you want. It's only 15 minutes.
Good to see you.
Okay, can I start?
Sure.
I just want to say that I was so delighted to meet in your home to prepare for this session, and to see you taking care of Minna and being the dad for a little girl, and I just thought, oh my gosh, that's been my life for the last 9 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where it's like I try to schedule meetings, and then whatever happens, and then they fall, and they hurt themselves, or whatever, you know, and or they have to do a diaper, you know. And I don't know, I just felt such a lovely kinship with you, and just in that stage of life, like it's just a stage of life that you're in.
Right.
It's beautiful.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because when you left a message on the machine to say I would meet either Thursday or Friday, and your window was just in the mornings, I was thinking, Thursday morning is my morning off when the kids are in daycare and the other one's in school, so I have about 2 or 3 hours where I can do stuff. So I actually set up a meeting at the lunch with my wife so I could actually talk to her and not be distracted. And I set up a workout to go swimming, which I love daily, so that's kind of, I didn't want to put that off. And then I was thinking, Friday I have a minute, so it would have been the easiest thing to know, I just can't meet it, it's not going to happen. And probably until about a year ago, I would have called it off. I would have said, no, I can't do it because I just have things to do. I have to take care of them, and she's going to be a handful, and I'm not going to be able to concentrate. So I actually pondered that idea and that thought process for a couple of minutes, and then I said, well, why shouldn't I do it? Well, I have a kid, but I feel there's something, I'm engaged, I'm committed in this, so I need to invest more time and energy into it. So what if my kid keeps crawling out of the table, and so what if I have to hunt her down because she's doing this or that until you're not getting the attention? So I responded and said, yeah, let's meet Friday. And boom, we actually met, and that's the first time that happened, that I could be part of that in-day process of planning this. So that was something which would never have happened, like I said, about a year ago. And I've noticed that in many different things. And obviously we're talking about relational meetings here, and that's something that's become very close to my heart. And again, 2 years, that was the furthest from my heart possible. So I've done this before where I need to go back a little bit in that I didn't grow up as a churchgoer and not in a churchy kind of family, and then meeting Rachel, who's a pastor's daughter, I obviously got a little more insight and went to be part of a community, religious, spiritual community. So that was definitely a learning experience, and when we got kids, Rachel was kind of a little hungry for finding this congregation where we could get kids engaged and meet people, so we tried a few things out, but nothing seemed to really click, and I didn't feel too comfortable, and liturgy seemed too traditional, conservative, and just like, I'm just not digging it. And then we came here Easter 2 years ago, and they played a song by Bruce Springsteen, and I was like, what is going on? And it was on the piano, and everyone was standing and joining in. It was like, ooh, this seems to be good. And then there was just this really good vibe. The sermon was fantastic, and the whole progressive liturgy, I really felt drawn in. It was kid-friendly with wandering quilt. It was like, that's fantastic. Get all the kids on there, and everyone's roaming around, and no one seems to be bothered by them. Everyone's even laughing at them, except for the parents. So I really love that spirit, but then came the breaking point to a certain extent, where it's like everything's going really well, but then after sermons, Pastor Mo, Terry Moore would say, we'll talk about this, or Melissa, Pastor Melissa, she would say, well, share your thoughts on the sermon. It's like, well, wait a minute.
One kind of conversation, or
kind of a mini one-to-one, if you will. So, set aside 10 minutes after the sermon and just exchange ideas. Talk about it.
Right in the middle of the service.
Right. And I was so thrown off by that, from the little church that I knew, I was thinking, hey, I just want to be preached to. I want to listen, I want to process, and then I want to go home, and if I'm so inclined, I want to think about it some more. But who are you to ask me here on the premises to talk about it to someone that I've met maybe 4 or 5 times? And if I have deep feelings, those might be some feelings that I maybe never shared with anyone else. Why would I share them with someone that I barely know? That's ridiculous. So that actually went on for a while, and I tried to do them, but I just wasn't good. It was more of a small talk and saying, no, I gotta get out of here. So with the kids, it was always a good excuse because I could roam around and church. So I would literally, under that pretense, leave the sanctuary.
Always got to take care of the girls, right?
And always told me, well, what's his wife doing? Rachel, that's what always told me. So that was a piece of me that I really did not like, and it's turned around to this point through taking this class the first time, and then just actually meeting the people and really connecting with them, to sitting right here in front of people and us having a conversation and trying to ignore them. So it's just super powerful, and it's taught me. I will say, I think the one thing that I've gotten out of being part of a congregation, a faith community, I used to be super judgmental. I used to see someone, and the moment they talked, I would just put them in some kind of draw. It's like, oh, this person is that way, and if they said something, I'm like, nah, not my cup of tea, and super judgmental. But I wasn't really paying attention. So I've learned slowly, I'm still in that process, and it's probably going to be ongoing, but I've learned to listen to people and to actually then reach out and try to find similarities. And that's so strong. And all of a sudden it's intergenerational as well. It's not just that I want to talk to people that I think that are on the same page, that have exactly the same interests. No, that's not what it's about. It's about finding commonalities and trying to work more from the heart than the head. And it's been really powerful for me. It's been quite enlightening.
Well, it's interesting because my experience with this just preceded you by a couple of decades. But when I came here, same thing. I was introduced to this kind of way of relational organizing and that. And my resistance, I didn't even really know it was resistance, of course, for a long time, right? Because I was like, well, I talk to people. I'm not, I know how to have a conversation with people, whatever. And for me, it's taken a long time to come to name some of this stuff, but for me, so much, a piece of my own resistance has been about control. And coming out of my own family system, right? In an addictive system, there's that, you just want to control something, right? So to control myself or my own emotions and process my own stuff, here and not out here, right? Not with certainly somebody I haven't met,
Right.
But over the years, when I've been asked to be vulnerable, in front of people, and then other times when just whatever I was going through in my life, it's just like, I start bawling in the middle of the church service, and then there you go, right? But it's like that all became possible. And for me, I realized, oh my gosh, it's a recovery practice, right? It's a way of just like letting go of kind of that individualism and that need for control and trusting. And not even, it's more than just trusting another human being, right? Because you're imperfect, right? So I'm sharing my stuff with you, and I can't have 100% security of how you're going to respond to that. But like trusting, like, I don't know, like the larger container of this, right? Like trusting the process of being mutually vulnerable and letting something new arise out of that. I've learned that over the years.
Was there something specific where you could you put your finger on some event or something where you had that aha moment?
I mean, I think it came, many times over the years, but I remember being asked a few years ago to tell my story at one of the Wednesday gatherings here, and talking about my own wilderness experiences. And I talked about some of the painful experiences of us trying to get pregnant and having miscarriages and whatnot, and how that experience, it wasn't until telling the story, like actually being asked to share my story, that I realized how profoundly that had impacted my own development as a leader. Like, how could that, you know what I mean? Like, that's sort of like private over here, public leader over here. But through telling that story, it was like, no, it's totally connected. It's just totally connected. So that's one example of the many.
Well, that's so interesting because the idea of something, of withdrawing yourself, thinking something just happens to you and only you feel a certain way. So we had a miscarriage as well, and we thought it was the end of the world. And then we learned we didn't want to talk about it, really, or just maybe to certain people. It felt somewhat weird. But then you open up and you realize there's so many people that exactly that kind of experience has happened to. And all of a sudden you can join forces and it just makes you feel stronger. I mean, there's a reason why with, anonymous alcoholics or something, they all share an experience.
Right.
And that's why they can connect on that level. So it makes a whole lot of sense, but it seems we're often just not willing to share because it would be making ourselves, like you said, vulnerable. And but I think it's the opposite. It's actually making us stronger because, I mean, you're a stronger person for talking about your problems with the kind of background that you described last week and just now.
Totally. I mean, it's just the opposite of what you think it's going to be. I mean, it's scary initially, but it's like all those things that you carry inside. Like once they're out and held by another person, or and then even like brought to that sort of more public level. It's just like, I don't want it anymore. I'm going to be carried around just by myself, right? Or with a little, kind of private group of people.
It's so interesting. One thing that's just come into my mind is, right, spur of the moment, is we just heard people talk about their experiences with relational meetings, and someone was saying how the agendas just didn't meet, wanting to talk about different things. I think people just don't really know how to listen anymore that well because everyone seems to have that private agenda. So we're not listening, we're just kind of trying to listen for certain things, so we come, I guess, with a certain kind of expectation to something. Whereas if we just let someone go and reveal information, usually you find more stuff out. So I've learned to try to just be a little more, asking someone in a broader sense, not like how are you doing, but just the whole, if they want to share information, they will. But I can't just prod for something.
Right. Well, and I've had kind of the opposite, well, not the opposite, an additional piece where I've discovered, even in myself, like, we're steeped in marketing culture, right? So, like, having that instinct in me to want to try to convince somebody of the benefits of organizing, You know what I mean? Or whatever, whatever it is, whatever the thing is that I'm interested in, right? It's like, there's that part of me that's like, oh, well, this is how you try to convince somebody of all the benefits of my particular process or way of being, or idea or whatever. But it's like, okay, that, or if I'm like selling Amway, it's the same thing, right? I'm like trying to convince somebody of something. It's like, no, that's not it. I can see it. It's like I can see it in myself. Okay, this is not about convincing anybody of anything.
Well, people are so protective. So, you mentioned like certain devices or whatnot. I try to tell my wife not to be on it and maybe do something else, but it's a way maybe of relaxing, and for me it's difficult to understand, but that way it's always tough to actually try to, have that face-to-face and actually take time. I think that's been a key piece that we've talked about here today as well, is making time for certain things.
Totally.
And it's just, to me, I've just learned, if anything, I've just learned, it's like stories to me, the key word. So I cannot overemphasize how important just that idea of storytelling is. I mean, that's why I like Johnny Cash so much. For a while, I was always wondering why people listening to Johnny Cash, if all the songs sound so similar or something. Well, it's like he tells stories that are straight from the heart, and that's why millions and millions of people just dig his music, and it's authentic stuff that's coming out. It's not just made pretend. Well, no, it's about the problems, that we've named. It's like being downtrodden, but actually vocalizing it and coming out with it in public. And that's why I do it the best.
I'm so impressed that you were able to admit that this whole time.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. You want to stay up here and they may have questions for you. So we just want to get some initial observations, kind of what you noticed about the conversation. And you can use the list if you want, you don't have to, but just kind of noticings or awarenesses about the conversation. And let's just, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I took some notes, so I've got a few. One is, you did a wonderful job at the beginning of establishing kinship.
Okay.
We have this in common.
Okay.
And then Toby was the first one to get vulnerable.
Okay.
About talking about his particular condition and stuff that, he could have ridiculed or betrayed the trust. We both did that.
Okay, before you go down your list, let's get some other people engaged. So, other observations?
It was crystal clear that this was intentional, that Toby actually, he said in the past he was just shining by, but he's learned that when you commit to something like that, it's a real appointment. It's important. You gotta take the time and set it aside. So that really came, through.
Okay. Okay. Yes?
There was a lot of meta talk, meaning that they felt really authentic and about what they were talking about.
Okay.
Which is really cool, that they were talking about how they were talking and about the place that they were in. That's very authentic, and that's meta talk.
Okay.
And they were really comfortable with that.
Okay.
I like what Sylvie was talking about towards the end there, not trying to convince. I think we so often go into a conversation, just like I'm saying right now, trying to convince you this.
Yeah. I'm in this really cool class and I want to tell you about it, so
and that's not listening at all.
Yeah. Right. How many people are guilty of that? No. Okay, thank you. I raised my hand. So, yeah.
I don't think I've ever looked as interested in what a person I'm talking with is saying ever in my life as Solveig looked at Toby.
Okay. Yeah. And was she just looking interested, or do you think she really was?
I think, I think she was.
I think she was too.
How do you get to that point,
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I say something really quick? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Toby.
I mean, this is a staged relational meeting, but I did not know certain things. Obviously, you didn't know the whole miscarriage thing or something. That's
right.
How would we know? I mean, it's like this is probably the first time we've had.
We have never had a relational conversation.
Exactly. this is staged. I mean, we didn't set an agenda or anything. Obviously, we talked about relational meetings to a certain extent because that's the idea.
Right.
But then you get from that, and I mean, takes quite a bit, and probably if you haven't done this a few times, if you haven't practiced, I wouldn't have given certain pieces of information. That's why, to me, the practice is so important.
Over here, someone that hasn't had a chance to make an observation? Anybody else?
I still got a couple of things.
Okay, no, just a minute. There's two other people here first, and then over here. Yeah.
Yeah, to me, it seemed like they both really knew what a relational meeting was, which seems kind of crucial. Like, how do I, I think that would be a different thing that I was maybe with somebody who maybe doesn't know that foundation and saying, like, this is what I want to do, but it's different than just hanging out and talking, so frame that, but I think that common understanding is obviously.
Okay, so can you say a little more about what was different about this than a more casual conversation? What you noticed that said, oh, they know?
Yeah, I think they both sort of, there wasn't like a clear, specific goal or agenda, but they both had a sense of why they were there.
Okay.
So it's like there seemed to be purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. What? Okay.
You could make it more specific.
Well, my comment was sort of related to that. I can see the conversation happening. I can see myself doing it. But I have no clue on earth how to get it to happen in the first place. How to express what I would want to have happen with somebody else. I totally at a loss.
Okay, can you respond to that? I mean, I think the gist of your question is you could see yourself there, but you don't know exactly what the how is. I mean, how to get to that level.
What do you say to
what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, to come up with a conversation that is that way.
How did this conversation start?
Right. Well,
how did they
not
start?
That one, because that was the stage one.
Well, it was staged, but they still had started. They didn't decide how they were going to do this ahead of time.
I'm saying, I'm a person.
Right.
You gave me an assignment.
Right.
I said, who would I approach?
Right.
First of all, and what would I say to them to have them have an interest in having this conversation with me? I have no clue.
Right.
I have the same question, and not only that, but so like, who do I ask? What do I ask them to talk about? And how do I get them to open up?
Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's stay with that for a little while. Who do I talk to? What do I say? How do I get them to open up? Let's stay with that for a little while. And do you want to say something about it first, or should we just open it up?
I think Cecil had something. If you're going to say the same thing that you said at one of our meetings, but go ahead. If you don't know. This is months back, so but go ahead.
In a number of relational meetings I've had, the person on the other side didn't know from their point of view that we were having a relational meeting. They thought we were having a conversation. But seriously, it just starts out that way. So I invited them. I said, I'd like to get to know you better. I've seen you in church, but I really don't know much about you. And that started a conversation. And it just comes out of that. It develops out of the curiosity that you have about somebody else in their life, what's important to them, what they care about. And when you start probing a little bit for that, suddenly they have the same kind of questions. And it just evolves. It happens.
So then I'm just thrown off by them not saying it is, because I have this kind of conversation a lot, but it's like, it's no time frame, it's 20 to 40 minutes, it's, these different things that were said, not it is.
Right.
Got me totally confused.
The difference is just having a conversation, and they happen all the time, but typically they're fairly shallow, and being intentional about it. So when you enter the conversation with the intention of having it be rich, as opposed to just having a conversation, things change. The conversations are different.
And this is a more or less, it's more or less not, and more or less leaning towards this as a goal. Okay, Toby, yeah?
If I remember correctly, Cecile, when we talked 5 months ago or something when we were planning these classes, and you talked about how at first you had felt uncomfortable about being approached by people, and it's kind of similar to how I feel. If you could kind of just talk about that, because that left a really deep impression on me, and that was kind of an aha moment.
because I felt very hesitant at first, actually for a long time, I felt hesitant about it. Somehow I reflected on the fact that if someone asked me to go have coffee with them and have a conversation, I would be honored. And I realized that by asking people to do that, I was actually honoring them. And it changed my point of view about how that went. The second thing I realized was that over time, with the same person, it actually gave me power. Not power over them, but power with them to accomplish things. So there was a lot more to it than I originally thought. And when I understood that part, it's like, oh, this is easy because I really do honor that person. I really do want to honor them. And I want to know about them, about their lives and their intentions and their purpose. It's a great honor.
Okay, back here.
I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us now to have one-on-ones here. Is that the plan?
Yep.
And if so, I don't want to be sound controlling or anything, but it seems like it's timely now because it's like, I feel ready.
Yes, you're ready for the second? Yes. So, and actually, if this were a Quaker meeting and we had 90 minutes instead of 40 minutes, we would go from this right to everybody have a relational meeting at your table now and debrief that afterwards. But we're not going to do that because, we're doing an abbreviated version now, and we are going to do that. So just be aware, we are going to practice one-to-one intentional conversations in this class. Because, why are we doing that?
Capacity. Power.
To practice, but it builds community, and what builds community? What is community made of? Relationships and stories and values acted upon. So to get that, can you imagine this happening in your congregation? Can you imagine organizing a number of one-to-one conversations with people to begin to break down the barriers among people and establishing more relationships? Can you imagine that as building capacity in your organization to move together in a way that you couldn't before? We hope so, that this is the foundational practice. It's so simple and so hard because of time. It's right back to that question of, are we going to devote ourselves to a practice of building relationships? And do we want to? And how badly do we want to? Then it's a matter of figuring it out, like prayer and silence, and figure it out. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
I did, yes,
Okay, when you're resting on the chair like Moses, couldn't quite hold them up long enough.
For me, and I've had a lot of conversations like this over time, trying to consider beforehand the kinds of questions to ask that would really elicit a connection.
Yeah.
And for me, as far back as my father-in-law, who was actively involved in developing the hydrogen bomb. Let me just tell you that I held a different position than him.
Yes.
And he's also a man, he has since died, of incredible integrity and goodness.
Yes.
So tell me about those times.
Well, what's wrong with that question?
That is the example.
Tell me about those times. What was it like for you? What were your questions? What were you wrestling with?
Yes.
Were you wrestling with anything, or was it clean and clear cut? I don't suspect it was.
Yes.
Who influenced you in your life? Who mentored you? I mean, there are lots of questions to ask.
So thinking about the questions.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah. Sorry.
Good. Solveig did not start with a question.
Right.
Solveig started with a relation. Oh my gosh, it was so wonderful that we got to sit down together last week and then made the connection of their children. So when you sit down with somebody one-on-one, think of the one-to-one. I'm sorry, one-to-one.
Yeah.
Think of the things that you know you have in common and let it just bloom from there. Instead of thinking, okay, I'm going to ask this question and this question and this question. No, just let it bloom.
Yeah.
But if you have active conflict with that person, he's going to throw the world into darkness, And he believes I'm going to throw the world in darkness by denying the absolute essential necessity for human beings to have nuclear power.
Okay.
Where do you begin when you have that kind of a split?
You begin with, what town did you grow up in?
Well,
You might begin with somebody easier, too. Okay, we've only got time for one more comment and then solving, so go ahead. Or question.
It feels like there's some confusion about the essence that we're looking for. I just want to give a quick example of something. I feel like this is something that is at the heart of my everyday yearning and being, is this kind of conversation.
Yes.
So today I was walking down the street, left a coffee shop, have to get to a bus in about 15 minutes to go and get my kids. And then there's a gentleman sitting inside of an alcove, and he says something about needing spare change. And I immediately responded with, "How you doing?" Right? And before I could get another step, he says, "I asked you for change, and you asked me how I'm doing. How do you think I'm doing?" And I turned around and I said, "Wow, you're right." I stopped everything I was doing to talk to this man. And I said, "You're right." And I didn't bother to say I didn't hear what you said, because that would have been worse, right? We were starting with two completely different perspectives on the world. And I could have walked by, I could have said something mean to release myself from it and get away. But instead, I said, "Wow, you've been talking to people today, and they've been blowing you off." And he said, yeah. And he started talking a little bit. I said, "You're the guy," I talked to him because I had talked to him in the same conversation about 6 months ago. "You're the guy that broke away from Street Roots." And he says, "Yeah, this lady, such and such." And he started telling his story. And I said, "Yeah, why is it that we live," and I'm just giving you an example, because it's really important that you hear how vulnerable we got really fast, because I wasn't afraid to love this person. And there's power and fast that comes out at the end of it. So what happened was that with this conversation, I was able to listen to him and say, we live in an oppressive, why is it that we live in an oppressive society? You're being oppressed, you get to a place where you're angry and frustrated, and you express yourself, and you get punished for that when that other person did exactly what you did and got answered to. And I'd like to hear more about that. And we went on talking for another 5 or 10 minutes, and I told him, I have $2.50 to get on the bus, and I'm going to give you all the rest of my quarters. And I know that's not going to help you a whole lot, because that's not the answer, but there are people that are working on that, and I named a few of them. And he said, I make this comic, and I've got a lot to offer. And we exchanged names, and I gave him a hug, and we shook hands, and we know each other's names. And I walked away thinking, wow, those comics that I've been collecting, I need to talk to Frank, and I know where to find him now. And I now have the power to organize because I know what Frank can do, and I know his story and what he can share. And that was just me being ready to have that relational conversation where, yes, we know each other. We know the pavement we walk on.
Thank you for that. So, Vic?
That was great. That was great. Yeah, I'll just say that just two quick comments. One is that part of it is just about listening and paying attention, right? And then following up, right? So we see people constantly every day, right? Your life involves people, right? And you hear things, right? So Toby happens to mention something about something at some point, and I'm like, I have to shift that perspective to remember it and not blow it off, right? Because we're trained to blow it off because we got other important things to do, right? So we don't listen, we don't actually pay attention. But if I shift that perspective in me, I can come back to Toby and go, I heard you say that thing about this thing. Tell me more about that, whatever. And how honored, right? How honored do you feel when somebody remembers something you said? Right? Right, like what Cecil was saying, like it's incredibly honoring.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I want to say is about building power and capacity. I know Dick articulated this a bit in the paper too, but that's been one of the most powerful ahas for me, is that actually, like, the conversation actually tangibly creates energy, right? Mm-hmm. I could give you a billion examples of times when I've gone into a conversation, I'm tired, and the day's been blah, 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 whatever it is, and I have energy and power and vision and excitement after that conversation, whether it's 20 minutes or an hour or whatever it happens to be. It actually creates energy and power.
Did you all feel that?
Yes.
Did you feel the energy that they had between the two of them when they were, I mean, I think it's not just energy here, but it's energy in the room.
Totally,
Yeah.
right? So, and it's not just a metaphor,
Yeah.
right? It's
So,
actually
Toby's story about doing one-to-ones in the sanctuary feeds the coffee hour, that feeds the small group in people's homes, because the energy is, it goes out. It's creative energy.